You're familiar with Resident Evil, you know, that one game franchise that not only won over the hearts of millions, but also utilized tons of different resources and in-game mechanics that revolutionized horror games as a genre? That one, yeah. Those games are pretty good, right? I mean, they ought to be, considering they were made by one of the best, Capcom. I've done quite a few videos where I mentioned Resident Evil, but I have yet to go in detail about the series overall and how it impacted me in my earliest years. At this point, I ask myself, who hasn't made a Resident Evil video? And that's really the major reason why I have been delaying any sort of editorial about them for now. There's nothing else to say about the games, really. They're all great in their own ways and offer something for everybody. So if you haven't, check them out for sure. I remember when my brother got a copy of Resident Evil Director's Cut for the PS1. The opening cutscene where the zombie looks at the camera in such a terrifying manner truly gave me nightmares, quite literally. I was obsessed with the pixelated style horror and was intrigued by the limited amount of resources given to the player for survival. It's very rare that we see this formula in games today. I've seen a few people test out the waters and try to make a game that replicates the same terrifying veil that Resident Evil has worn so well over the years. Unfortunately, most of these games fail due to faulty programming and/or the programmers just barely trying and releasing a product that isn't even finished. However, one day I was browsing Steam out of my boredom and I discovered a game called Nightmare of Decay. Looking at the screenshots, I just thought it was another shitty first-person shooter zombie sandbox. I was originally gearing up to do a cursed Steam review about this. Then I scrolled down to the reviews, and that's when I noticed how much actual praise the game was getting. People relating it to the classic retro era of horror, some people directly calling it a Resident Evil successor. Really just amazing things about this tiny game that costs only $5. Needless to say, I have played and beaten the game since then, and I have to agree with the praise. It's a really awesome game. It not only mimics the art style of the classic RE games, but it incorporates a whole series of unique mechanics that give it more of a horror game feel. Sprint is limited, objects and ammo are hidden in places you wouldn't think to check, some puzzle solutions require some actual thinking, and the bosses are plentiful and challenging. A better example for me would be to put Nightmare of Decay and Cry of Fear side by side, as two of the most underrated story-based horror games ever to date. Nightmare of Decay starts up in the eyes of some random person. We don't know who we are. In fact, we don't have a face, voice, or even a body. Consider your character as yourself. You're tuning into the news and hear about a woman who went missing named Judith Glasgow, who claimed to be suffering from manic episodes and nightmares caused by hallucinations. The player decides suddenly he has the munchies and has to eat a piece of pizza in the fridge. Of course, trying to eat the pizza does nothing right away. You first have to interact with the inventory, equip the pizza, and then place it in the microwave. This first part seems small, but trust me, it's important. The game is teaching you how to use certain items such as keys or anything else, and to make sure you have the item equipped before clicking on the desired object. A really subtle and clever way to introduce your mechanic. The plot is somewhat complex, but Resident Evil's timeline hasn't been perfect either, so I don't really judge it by that. You awaken at a mysterious manor full of monsters and all other sorts of creatures of the night. Although I must say this also isn't your typical zombie game experience, meaning that there's no branching paths or different dialogue options or anything like that. This game is very straightforward, which is not a bad thing. The overall feeling of being uncomfortably close to these threats is enough to warrant you a weapon from a distance, which the game thankfully gives us right in the beginning. Gotta love the homage to Resident Evil. The game also has a couple of close quarters weaponry like the knife and crowbar, but unfortunately getting close enough to your enemies is really not recommended. The first time I played this, I had no idea how complex and vast it was going to be. For a $5 horror game, it doesn't show off much to the average person, but I can safely say after grinding out the campaign twice, I had a lot of fun and the story is interesting enough to keep you engaged. Another key to the player's survival in this game is looking around for items and places that normally you wouldn't look, like corners, underneath cabinets, behind dressers, really any room that you go into has items. Gunplay feels natural to me, and the accuracy of your weapon depends heavily on whether or not you are standing still. Do you sacrifice standing in the middle of a hallway for 2 seconds to kill a zombie, or do you sacrifice your very limited sprint to run around it? These questions come into play often during the game, and it's not something I'm ashamed of in the slightest. The map size is enormous considering how many floors and shit there are in the manor. It takes quite a bit of problem solving, backtracking, and carefully placed shots to get by in this game. Puzzles are one of the game's better features. They're not too complicated, at least once you figure out the order in which you have to receive key items. There's one puzzle in particular involving the pantry that reminded me of the early days of Resident Evil, but I'll admit, I was stumped for quite some time before I noticed that I needed to use the bloody bag found in the pantry to throw down the dumb waiter lift. There's even a lab puzzle, just like the original Resident Evil. You have to mix together a bunch of chemicals to create an acidic solution in order to destroy a huge wall of flesh later on in the game. Then, the second after that, you discover another complex puzzle. You'll need 3 coins to unlock this one, and a simple riddle solution using your big brain to overcome the challenge. Fuck my butt. They have dogs in this game too? Thankfully, so long as you avoid them, you can sneak around, and looking around different environments, like I said, in the different rooms, will give you multiple items that you'll need to survive. It's a great feeling to access a new area, and it's an even better feeling when you find some new weaponry like the shotgun. It's a fucking trap. Thankfully, you can run past these guys. Aside from having its own storyline, the game is excellent with combat. There are multiple moments where you have to consider your gear and ammo before entering an area, especially the endgame boss fight, which can be extremely difficult at times. There's even an environmental puzzle you have to solve by pushing a ladder towards an air vent, granting you access to yet another new area. It's little details like this that keep me really invested in the gameplay. Most of the charm in Resident Evil comes from the idea of backtracking and puzzle solving, so it's no surprise that this game uses that to its advantage. I gotta say, I have to praise whoever programmed the map in this game as well. It's crisp, it's clear, and it shows you the important things in every single room that you may not have seen, in terms of storytelling anyways. All in all, it has the formula for being a classic horror game. However, is it truly worth the $5 Steam price? I have to say, yes, absolutely. I encourage you to throw $5 bills in the hands of the developer for their impressively artistic work. If you're worried about the enemy compendium, don't be. The game throws all sorts of dangerous surprises at you when you least expect it. Thankfully, it feels like a fair and balanced experience. I was never too low on ammo on normal, and I only got frustrated a couple of times due to some, well, very odd decisions. Granted, the game is very fun and appealing to anyone who's feeling nostalgic, but there are some aspects of it that make me wince. One complaint I have is, some of the bosses in this game feel completely unfair. Sometimes a cutscene plays to show you what you're up against, but most of the time I just ran right up to the bosses and cultists guns blazing because it was the only option, since standing still and shooting is just silly willy energy. Cultists appear about halfway into the game, and they're more trouble than anything. They use firearms, which is handy because these can be received for ammunition. However, their accuracy at times feels broken, and they hit me 9 times out of 10, and they don't reload either. It's nice when you're on a segment such as the night puzzle and you have to do some light thinking to solve it, but it doesn't feel nice when you're pinned against the fucking wall all the time by a boss who is unpredictable on every first encounter. Some bosses can outrun you, causing you to constantly spam your inventory screen and heal the second before you die. Some bosses, if not all of them, like Arc fucking Meaties here, have a ranged attack, so you can't dodge it. Once again, it's not impossible, it's just difficult. I forgot to mention earlier that there's also a shooting range mode where if you unlock a certain amount of points, you will also unlock different items that you can use, such as ammo and health. Look at this crazy bitch hacking up some poor fucking dude who was simply vibing. Time to murder her ass. Take her head? No. Oh, the heads are a part of another fucking puzzle. Moving back to the boss battles, this one in particular is 100% unfair. A crazed guy with a chainsaw appears and starts sprinting after you. Shooting him is useless. You'll only get killed. Turns out you're not supposed to attack him head on. You're supposed to lure him over to these generator things, shoot them, which shocks him and puts him in a downed state. Then you shoot the blister on his back, and that does damage to him. But what irritates me is that I didn't know that prior to my first run. A trial and error boss fight, and it didn't even feel climactic at all. There's really only a couple of these moments, though, where I feel like this guy who's smashing his face against the wall. They also made a slight mistake on the sudden difficulty spike near the end. Right before you get to the final boss, you have to collect a series of squares that unlock a pathway to the king's lair. In order to get said squares, you first have to collect these silver discs, which unlocks the rooms with the squares. But now we have to go against both spiders and cultists, which are a pain in my rectum. Spiders each take 10 standard pistol bullets to kill, making them practically sponges. The giant spider boss is just ridiculous. There's no strategy, it's just unload as much ammo as you can into its fucking eyes and hope to God it doesn't kill you first. Then you can take one of the silver discs and proceed. I mean, was all that necessary? Seemed like a lot to put the player through, but oh no, it gets much worse. Soon enough, you end up finding some poor sack of shit with the worst stomachache of his life. He warns you that there's a monstrous beast in the caves ahead and says that your only option is to run. The game baits you into thinking it's this brand new zombie type that you are immediately introduced to, but it's actually not. It's this. Yes, I shit you not, the monstrous beast from Monty Python's Holy Grail is a boss in this game. While it did make me laugh at first, I found it to be an insanely hard fight, rightfully so. Oh, this fucking bunny! I found out there's a way to damage him without him touching you, and that's to wait for him to jump, but you can never time it correctly. Then I realized it's easiest just to use the handgun because it has a large mag capacity and it can easily stun him. This is probably the last negative thing I'll say about the game for now. We're almost to the end of the game, and we've come across this game's variant of the Regenerator from Resident Evil 4. Obviously, if you try to kill him, nothing happens. He just regenerates. The trick here is to lure him away from the next room so that you can go in and clear the zombies and get the fuck out of there. Once you enter, you have to kill Lord William. He's the final boss, and thankfully he isn't too difficult like the other bosses. You can use actual strategy here against him, along with all the weapons you've acquired along the way. It has that claustrophobic Resident Evil vibe to it that makes me enjoy this segment a lot. Overall, I really think you should try Nightmare of Decay. I didn't go too in deep with the details of the story or much of the mechanics or anything, but that's because I want you guys to be the judge. If you've got $5 to spare and you're feeling an indie Resident Evil type game won't be fun, you're wrong. Nightmare of Decay is and was a truly nightmarish and fun experience. I look forward to a sequel if the developer ends up making one.